welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by a friend of the show. Once you're here twice, you are a friend of the show. She was here to talk about a novel last year that I absolutely loved, and it's been almost a calendar year since that conversation, and I'm so excited to have her back. So welcome. Could you introduce yourself and the book you're here to discuss today?
Absolutely. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Jen, for inviting me again. My name is Katherine Reay, and last year I was here for the Berlin Letters, but this time I get to talk about a forgery story called The English Masterpiece.
Nice. Yeah, I am so excited about, finding out about like the turn because we're in a new time period from your last book in a new country. And even though it's about, we were talking right before I started recording, it's about art forgers, not spies. There is still a whole bunch of secrets and betrayals and intrigue, and it's so exciting. So let's start out by talking about, first off, 70s London. What drew you to the setting, particularly like the art world at the time?
The art world back then, I have to tell you, was so different from what we know it of as now. And that was a revelation for me. So, number one, I wanted to have a forgery. I wanted to write a forgery story. And Picasso dies in April of that year, 1973. And the whole world was trying to commemorate him, have great exhibitions, honor the world's greatest artists. So it was an amazing time period because not only that, but we also think it's sort of a fun, groovy time period with the clothes, etc., and the music. But also, it wasn't unlike our own, I found. It was tumultuous. There was a lot of inflation. There's a lot of global uncertainty. So it was a time period I could relate to. But all that aside, and how I started out with choosing it is the art world. Art didn't become the commodity it is today, the place where people put wealth until the 1980s. And in 1973, it was still classified under insurance as marine cargo. And so that made this element of the story so dynamic because when you take a painting off the wall, it can be stolen, but oftentimes it wasn't insured. Because once somebody owned that painting, it was no longer cargo, it was on their wall. And so it wasn't insured. So it added this element that we take for granted, in the 2020s that was really fun to explore.
Mm. Yeah, it is such an interesting world. And I really love we have two perspectives sort of in this book. We have two dual perspectives, and I want to talk about that too. But our first, Lily, who is an assistant at the Tate Modern collection under the keeper, Diana Gilden. And but first, before we talk about the characters themselves, when I was reading the book, I had this moment where I was like, Diana Gilden, Lily. Diana Gilden, Lil Was that intentional?
It wasn't intentional in that perspective. I wanted to give Diana not only that sort of goddess name of strength, but that gilded name that all is beautiful, all is. And so the gilded lily part, that I actually was really drawn to Lily's family, all the women being named after flowers and what that meant for growth and etc. And so the fact that you have sort of the gilded lily, that was just a lovely coincidence because there's a lot of interplay beneath even what these two characters are aware of. So that was kind of fun.
That is so fun. Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about Lily. I really love her. She's sort of like a little bit of a hot mess, but she's, very earnest and she's trying really hard.
So hard. I mean, she does.
And in contrast, we have Diana, her boss. I'd love if you could talk about shaping those two different perspectives and maybe how the perspective you choose to write in shapes that too. Because Lily's chapters we get in the first person and Diana's are in third. So could you talk about that?
Without giving too much away. You know, there is Lily is, you are right. She's kind of a hot mess at the beginning. She's incredibly stubborn, smart, talented, extraordinarily talented. But, she gets things wrong. And the reason we are in first person there is I wanted to bring us as intimate and tight to her as we could be, because that's us on any given day. We too are striving to do the best we can with the perspective we have. And that was so interesting to kind of play with. There's a moment that changes Lily's life and how she views it and how everyone in her family views it. And so I wanted us to be tight to Lily. Now, Diana is someone very different. And Diana is in third person because, in many ways, it is revealed that Diana might not even know herself as well as she wants people to believe she does. And there is a veil between the outside world and who Diana really is. And so we can't really get close to Diana, nor does she have the courage to do that herself. There's a moment at the end where she just might, and we'll leave it to find out if she does.
So interesting. Yeah, I really like, their dynamic. It's very real and very lived in and sort of like, again, to use the word messy and contradictory in the way that I think like female relationships can be, like any type of female relationship, but particularly when there is like a level of inequality in the relationship, right? Like they have the hierarchy of their jobs, but also like sort of like the social and class hierarchy of London at the time also shapes their relationship. Could you talk about that a little bit?
It truly does. The more I did research at that time period, I was it was impressed upon me what a very hierarchical and static structure existed within London society. So there is that. And Lily makes that point at one time. She lives in a very posh neighborhood, and that address has given her access to things she didn't even know that existed prior to that. But she actually lives in a government subsidized building. And that building is true. It is on that street in Kensington. So it was sort of playing with all these different dynamics because Diana was the same way. Once she achieved a backstory or her life could be presented as one of the club, she could get in that club. And yet she still can't. It was a time when the men's clubs ruled. And she very quickly finds out that those backroom deals are who gets promoted, who gets access, and so it was really interesting to play with all of those different levels. And you're right, between the two women, Diana sees someone she can mentor, and Lily sees someone who can be a mentor. And yet there is competition. There is true friendship to the extent that it can be true friendship. So yeah, there's a lot at play.
Yeah, definitely. And, they do share a lot too, as you were talking about. Like they are both very much like the fish out of water in their situation. You were talking about how Diana is the only woman to really rise to the level at this time. And Lily is sort of really dealing with, I think, like a lot of imposter syndrome too about her class and sort of what it means to exist in a space that really wasn't made for you. Like they both have to deal with that.
Yeah, they do. That is true. And she knows that due to the way she became assistant curator, nobody will keep her in that position if Diana loses her position, which adds a ton of vulnerability to Lily's struggle throughout the story.
Mm. So let's talk about the sort of the catalyst for the plot, the initiating incident. I will let you reveal, as much as you would like to be revealed at this moment. But it's a beautifully written moment, I think. So yeah, talk about like the exhibition opening.
So, as I said, in April of 73, when Picasso died, everybody wanted to commemorate him. And Picasso in 1960, and coincidentally, it was at the Tate Gallery, had the biggest exhibition in the world of his works. And why I say it was the biggest, it was the first that is dubbed in the press as a blockbuster exhibition. In many ways, I don't think we understand now with distance how big Picasso was. So the Tate puts on this incredible commemorative exhibit within 2 weeks of his death, and Lily walks in on the opening morning with patrons and press and the director, everybody there. And she looks at a painting and she kind of quirks her head a little and she announces out loud, "That's a forgery." And scandal ensues. Like it is, silence, scandal, horror, and all the dominoes fall from there. So that's how it begins. And that pretty much is scene one.
Yeah, we really do get right into it. But there are like a lot of really interesting flashbacks too that tell you more about who Lily was and who Diana has been. And there are a lot of, a lot of pieces. This is always a question I have for people who are writing both in dual perspective and when there are, jumping back and forth in time. Like, how do you manage that while you are writing? Like, does it end up looking different than you think it will at the beginning? Do you outline a lot or do you sort of wing it and see how it goes?
A little bit of all of the above.
Mm,
I know some firm spots I need. I need the betrayal moment.
mhm,
And I know where that's going to be. And I always have the ending. So in this, it's not the denouement per se, but there is a scene at the end when Diana and Lily confront each other. And that moment I always had in my head. So I have those blocks. And then I write this story in order. I do not write Lily separately from Diana's chapters because they build upon each other, because it's one arc. Even though they're two women having their own journeys, the novel as a whole has to build. And so there are times that I'm really, I'm in Lily's voice and I know Diana needs a moment here. And I'm like, darn, I have to stop being with Lily and I have to chat with Diana. And I make sure I do that because that interplay between the two on the page, not necessarily in real time, they're considering different things internally, et cetera, but that interplay is always threaded through the novel. So I don't know if I answered that question well.
yeah, you did. I'm really fascinated by that interplay because, sometimes when you get a perspective shift, I always try to love like figuring this out. Like I'm very much a like I want to look under the hood and see how it works type
Yeah,
person. Like, oh, are you shifting the perspective now to show us something we have to see, or are you hiding something that we
probably
can't
both.
see right now? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So I am, really interested too in Diana's relationship with her partner, Heinrich. He's a super interesting character. And again, like, let's not, I will let you reveal whatever you would like to reveal up to this moment. I will even edit out me saying this so that so that there's no, you know, nothing too ominous. But I really like the ways in which their relationship is sort of built on a certain kind of like, how can I say this without being insane? A certain type of equality and openness, but there is also like there are inequalities at work too, and things not being said, and misdirections and things like that. So how do you write? What is your approach to writing like surface and subtext? And when do you let subtext take over? And like when do you, did that make any sense as a question?
It actually does make sense. And
Okay.
I tell you, and I won't reveal much here
Mhm.
because of this sentence. I love subtext. I love writing with subtext because in any conversation that we have with somebody else, there's always subtext. I mean, I could be asking about the weather, but really I'm asking deep down, are you okay about what happened last week? Do you know what I mean? There's always subtext. And between these two, it is rich. Their backstory unfolds a little, and it is not the healthiest of relationships, we'll say. And the dynamic is intriguing, and I definitely want readers to have that unfold for them. But I love sort of just hinting at what is not on the page, but what we all know is there, and just letting that play out. So there you go, Heinrich and Diana.
The stakes are so much higher in London society too, because we're talking about, a very hierarchical society in which appearances are very important too. And especially for high profile figures like Diana, who are prominent in the art world, managing subtext becomes a full-time job, I think,
Yes, it does.
in your life and your career.
I think he was exhausted at the end of every day.
Yeah, yeah. It's she's really like she's so compelling because as a boss, she gives me hives sometimes just thinking about like the but But she also is like, she does truly want to be a mentor too. And she does care in her own ways. And she feels very informed to me by the sort of compromises that you have to make in order to get so far in a society that really wasn't built for you to get that far.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. I do agree with that. And that is what made her compelling for me. And I will tell you, Diana came first. She
Mm.
was never, ever going to be the heroine, the main character of this story, but she did come first. She is the character who inspired the story.
I love when I'm always interested to hear in like who sort of speaks to you first. Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so a little bit of a shift. I have some more questions about your research. This is going to be very leading, and you're going to know who I'm talking about immediately. But there are a lot of really interesting little cameos that pop up. And I'm wondering that, like, that seem to appear quite organically in the process of your research. So could you talk about like the surprises that you found along the way while you were researching this world?
Okay, so part of me doesn't want to reveal the one you're talking about because the name
Fair
is still
enough. Yeah.
coming up. Okay, but let's just say this man we all know. He is super famous. And one of his movies, and I say it in the author notes, I wanted a scene from one of his movies in this book because it's just delicious. And so then when I was doing research on the art school where Lily works, he was a student there. In real life, he was a student there at exactly the year Lily works there. And I was like, well, now he has to be in the book. So, because logically, he actually could have known Lily. So, this very famous man that we all know with piercing blue eyes does have a cameo in the book. And I'm going to figure out his agent's address and send him a copy and say, check out page so and so, because it is organic how it came about. It was just so shocking that I was like, okay, this feels maybe silly, but it's too true not to include. So that is how he got in the book.
So cool. And I think it is a good idea not to reveal who it is. And like this, listeners, I'm going to tell you again at the end, but get your hands on this book. It is so much fun. And it really does sort of make you, it totally changed the way that I see that movie that you're also referencing. This is now an extremely mysterious conversation for anybody
Oh,
listening.
it's serious, everyone. Don't read the author notes first before you read the book.
100%. I mean, that's another question I have, though. What is I've actually never asked about this and I've always wondered it, but like, I once wrote a book with a friend, and coming up with the acknowledgments was the most stressful part of the entire project for me. Like thinking of everybody you have to thank, but also getting in those little interesting tidbits, like about the writing of it that you want to share. Gosh, like how do you go about like writing about your own work and the people who help make it happen?
Okay, so those are two different things. And one I think I do well, and one I think I do poorly. And the reason is the author's note, I actually take notes while I'm writing the manuscript. Like, ooh, write this little thing about the Berlin Wall, or write this thing about the movie that inspired it and the famous man that's in it, and write how it came about. And so I'll take little notes so that at the end of the book, I'm not like, what did I want to tell them? But I don't take notes along the way about who I need to thank. And there is a moment at the end of the book because so many people are involved that I have this moment of panic about, who did I talk to and who helped with this? And I need to be more conscious of taking notes along the way. So I do apologize for everybody in the acknowledgments who is not listed. It was a moment of panic. I hope I got everybody, but yeah, I need to handle that one as well as I handle the author notes because there are so many things I want to share and there are so many people I want to thank. Uh, so I got to do a
I
better
did
job on
make them one section, and they are two separate sections. Maybe that's why we struggled with this so much.
that.
To
But
make
they can be one beautiful section. And maybe if I combine them in one, I'd do a better job.
it. Wow. So back to the book. I'd love to talk a little bit more about let's talk about like the wider London society at the time because it is in some ways about this like very insular world that sort of is the art world at that time, but it is so shaped by the things that are happening not just culturally but also politically at the time. Can you talk about like sort of the added sphere, I was going to say like the geopolitical situation, but that's huge. So like you just talk about sort of like events, like the events that you felt were essential in shaping the story you wanted to tell.
So I read an article that actually said 1973 was the year that changed British society more than any other in history. Now, that is a shocking statement if you think back to the beginning of World War I, World War II, the Blitz, Dunkirk. I mean, just huge swaths of history. And this author was positing that 1973 was the biggest change. Now, it was a tumultuous year, and the labor strikes threatened to shut down every aspect of the UK at that time. There were fuel shortages. That is the time the government stepped in and instituted a 3-day work week because there wasn't enough fuel. There was also international political crises, huge recession, very high inflation. So there were a lot of things, and this came after the boom, which was slow to start up post World War II, but a boom had been going on of construction and et cetera, and then everything gets constricted again. And that has an effect on people. You know, you don't want to lose your job. Your union could go on strike. It really was it was a time when things became more confined. People were a little more insular. And I think that opened up again in that relatively, I'm going to say relatively peaceful, but when money started going back into the market and people felt better of the 1980s. Also, it was the time when in 1973, during what we call now, the Troubles, that was the first IRA bombing on UK soil. That was the Old Bailey buildings. And so that was the beginning of that. So there's a lot of uncertainty at the time. And it was just a very interesting time to write because I think we feel a lot of that uncertainty today. Maybe the same reasons, maybe different reasons, but it felt very familiar.
It does feel very familiar. And, it really got me thinking about like the scale on which, history happens. Because I remember when I was much younger, thinking about a society, 70s London, that was 30 years almost past World War II. When you're young, that seems like a really long time. When you have lived longer and you studied history and sort of understand timescales better, you realize that like that is still very much a society that is being like actively shaped by that and sort of trying to move away from it. What interests me the most, though, is that like between Diana and Lily, you really get to see like how people in different classes like just move through kind of totally different worlds, because Lily and her family are so much more impacted by all of these things that we've just been discussing. It just is a really kind of stark contrast that really, I think, adds a lot of
Yeah.
nuance to the time.
I totally agree with that. And one that we need to be aware of. Just this idea, because you're right. Lily and Diana, their spheres weren't at all like they were existing in entirely different little planets within the same city. And I think that happens today too. But yeah, that was fascinating to write because in many ways, especially in that society, you were pigeonholed such that you had no access to that other little revolving planet. And so Lily does give us this little glimpse up that is highly unusual in that time period. Fluidity didn't happen in that society until quite a bit later.
It's also interesting, and I'm really excited for our patrons to read this one. Gosh, what are you working on next? I know, these things often have to remain secretive for a time, but are you stepping into a new time period again, or?
I'm sort of, well, no, maybe stepping back into a time period, I guess. It's a split time story between today and 1950 London and Oxfordshire. And it is about the 1950s storyline. It's called The Undercover Bookshop. And it's in the 1950s, a young housewife thinks her next door neighbor might be a spy, but she's the main character. And then in the Today story, that bookshop still exists, run by her great granddaughters, and they discover what really happened in 1950.
Ooh.
It's a lot of fun, a lot of, back in London, a lot of mystery novels. It's a mystery bookshop. It's called the Undercover Bookshop. So a lot of books, a lot of literature, a little bit of spies. Yeah, so I don't know. I'm not necessarily stepping back in spies, but I guess dipping my toes into those waters. Because forgery really wasn't that far from spying.
I am so excited for that. And I hope, you don't, I'm not pressing too much on your time. If I reach out in another year, we could talk about that one too.
I love it.
Cool. All right, listeners, it's on you. Please check out The English Masterpiece. By the time that you hear this, it'll be out in the world. So please head to your favorite independent bookstore or library, wherever you like to go for your books. Okay, it's time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.